Thursday. Welcome to another episode of Crypto with English. I'd like to warmly welcome to you all a very special guest and good friend of mine, Abdul Osman. He's the CEO of Goracle. And today we're going to focus on what his project entails. And also we're going to get into the weeds and nuances of the significance and the overall importance of oracles. Often, for people in this space, when you hear about blockchain, decentralized technology, naturally, nobody thinks that equation includes a third party or some sort of middle broker or some sort of outside party. However, as we're moving towards this Web3 future, there are some practical realities that we're going to have to integrate in order to reach the various successes that will hit along the way towards mass adoption. So, Abdul, thank you very much for coming on to the show today. And by the way, it's awesome seeing you again since Berlin as well.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Adam. Love your show. Love the caliber of people and the diversity of people you bring on. Very happy to be here. And yeah, good to see you again.
Well, thank you for that. And and you're definitely what I consider a high caliber innovator and expert in this space. And I absolutely loved your presentation at the Blockchain Oracle Summit as well. So it's an absolute treat for me and also for the audience to have you on today.
Yeah, very excited to be here. And just to talk about oracles.
Let's go. So talk about Goracle. How did it come about? What problems do you and your team seek to resolve? And what are some of the, you could say milestones you and your team hope to accomplish, within the next 6 months?
Yeah. So, Goracle, Decentralized Blockchain Oracle, came about due to a very specific need. We were working on a sports application that was supposed to be built on chain, but we needed data to kind of make things happen on chain. And so to get that data, we had to get it from an off-chain source. But if you're trying to make a decentralized application and you're controlling where the data comes in from, suddenly it's not decentralized anymore. You control that source, and you can, people are going to have to trust you never to mess with the scores or something like that. So we went about looking for a good decentralized oracle for our use case, and we're just not able to find one that kind of had high quality, high throughput data. And so we decided to just build our own.
Very nice. And talk about, if you can, or I guess to the extent that you're comfortable with, talk about some of the underlying technology in crafting and architecting this application, so to say.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting because the whole reason blockchain is so secure and trustless, and this is something I talked about at the summit, is because it's not because when we say trustless, absence of trust, is the trust is so distributed amongst thousands and millions of people that it's essentially becomes you don't have to trust a single person, and because you're trusting so many people. And so we tried to make sure we're designing something similar. It has to be trustless. You have to get that data on chain trustless, and to do so, we require a large number of nodes reaching consensus on that data. And so now you don't have to trust a single source to get you the score of the Raptors game. You can just trust that thousands of people agree that it's correct, and generally, that is secure enough for your use case.
Got it. So, as we all know, the decentralized nature of blockchain, it presents a lot of possibilities and a lot of solutions. In fact, however, it's not perfect. One of the, I guess you could say, drawbacks is that historically it requires a lot of, electrical output, when, I guess you could say, performing a lot of these processes. So, as great as blockchain is, of course, like anything, there's drawbacks. There might be some, inherent disadvantages. So if you could explain to the audience, what do oracles add to blockchain to make it better or even make it closer to perfect?
Yeah, so to use blockchains in real world applications, so think about insurance, decentralized insurance. Think about ticketing. Right now we go through Ticketmaster or StubHub. Think about sports applications like betting. Think about decentralized finance, foreign exchange. for all of these, the goal is with decentralization is to start removing these middlemen that have mostly controlled the economy in the past, and not completely moving away from it, but giving people the ability to trade directly with each other, reduce costs, break down monopolies, and increase innovation. The challenge with that is insurance. You can't insure something because weather doesn't happen on the blockchain, right?
Right.
You can't play basketball on the blockchain. You can't, buying tickets. It's how do you get that information? How do you transact with the real world in a decentralized manner? And so, really, the drawback of blockchain is it has to be a closed environment that cannot know about the outside world to be so
Ah,
secure.
that's right.
And that's the reason why oracles are really important to mimic that security and introduce outside world without introducing any vulnerability. Because as the weakest point in a chain, or what is it? The weakest link. A chain is as good as its weakest link,
Right. Yeah, that's
right?
right. Yeah, that's a quote. Yeah. Chain is
Yeah,
only as good as
yeah,
its weakest link.
as its
Yeah.
weakest link. So the goal of the blockchain or the oracle is to be a strong link, as strong as the rest of the blockchain that it supports.
Got it. And is there a big difference between, let's say, Web 2 oracles and Web 3 oracles? Because maybe the messaging needs to be tailored, a little bit. Because I think a lot of times when people think of, Web 2, you think of essentially almost like a custodian that kind of has access and control to your information, your actions, your transactions, and whatnot. Could you explain, Web3 oracles and maybe how they're different and how maybe some of those traditional risks just aren't there?
Yeah, in the traditional world, oracles and the platform and everything was with the organization that you're dealing with. They were the judge, jury, and executioner, to use an example,
It's a
right?
good way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There are times where corporations were not treating people fairly. There are corporations that do treat people fairly, and ultimately, whatever happens, it's up to that organization to either make sure things go right for you, or if something doesn't, to listen to your needs and to respond to that. And so the whole decentralized movement came about because of these. I think it was Bitcoin. Bitcoin was the first one to solve the
Yeah.
problem of money being controlled by central agencies. And the whole point of these central agencies is they sometimes tend to create these monopolies or oligopolies. And the
Yeah.
problem really here is how do we get away from that and transact with each other where it makes sense to. And so where it makes sense to transact with each other, how do we do it without having to trust each other in a sense?
Right. So let's say, hypothetically speaking, if I'm using a cryptocurrency platform, let's say like an exchange, let's say a decentralized exchange where I can, either buy and sell crypto tokens directly from other people, or I could buy it almost akin to one would when they're putting in a buy or a sell order in the stock market, something like that. So, for instance, if there was, let's say, a blockchain oracle that's in that system to help with those transactions, that oracle is essentially only like a it's only like an elevator. It's not, let's say the bellhop who's, controlling it, or it's not like the you could say the race car driver, in control of the car. It seems like, would it be something that it's just the Web3 oracle is just something that completes a very narrow or like singular action, so to say.
Yeah, yeah. I think your elevator example was a good one. You want to be able to know, okay, I need something from, the first floor all the way up here, and I need it to be extremely predictable. And an elevator, you know what you're going to get. You push the button, it's going to come there, right? And you just need to know that it cannot deviate from those rules. If I press the fifth floor, I won't end up in the
Right.
next building, right? And so that's really the goal of oracles, is just to get the data from point A to point B, and be predictable and do so predictably, without kind of any sort of surprises or any maliciousness, especially being introduced. When you can depend on that happening, you can exactly transact peer to peer, You can build these applications that were generally controlled by an organization. So let's say I wanted insurance, I could be insured by something by thousands of people, right? Instead of a single person, and those thousands of people split the profits, things like that. And so that thing that's insured depends on real world information. So there's a flood that happened. They just need to know, did a flood happen and did it destroy these properties? It's a yes or no thing. And as long as that data, whether the flood happened or whether it's been a drought, can be put on chain for the insurance application to be able to do what it needs to do to reach a decision once somebody has claimed it, that's really what matters here.
Right. So would it be fair to say, to use another analogy, and I sometimes like using analogies, is like a blockchain Web3 oracle more like a thermometer? So the red liquid will the mercury will go in the direction of the temperature. It's and maybe a Web2 oracle is more like somebody controlling the weather.
Yeah. That's a good one. Web3 Oracle just really reflects the reality of what's happening. In a sense, Web2, it's also kind of it's maybe not maybe the better example I would use is they're controlling the thermometer itself, right?
Right.
Rather than
Right.
the thing going
That's
up and down
probably a
its
better,
own.
yeah, better comparison.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So they set it to where they think it is or where it should be, and you're trusting them to do that. And if there's any dispute, it's just between you and that Web2 part.
Got it. So talk about maybe some of the early stages. Let's say putting together the team, putting together the MVP, pitching the idea. Talk about some of those processes and stories, and what were those experiences like? Because a lot of aspiring tech entrepreneurs also watch the show. So I feel, and myself included, a lot of people get a lot, from those type of, you could say, anecdotes and stories.
Yeah, it's definitely tricky in the early days. Blockchain developers are hard to come by. It's a recent development. Smart contract developers are not that common as common as other programming languages.
Right.
And so really one, it's about kind of building something that motivates some of the best people in their field to jump on board and doing a lot of trial and error and really failing fast at the beginning to kind of see the best way to do it. And once you do that enough at the beginning and not getting frustrated and just moving very quickly and iterating quickly, and I think the biggest thing is being able to inspire people about what you're building. And no matter what you're building, people are inspired by it. It's just finding those people, which I
Yeah.
think is a lot easier now with the world being comfortable online than
Right.
it was maybe in 2019 for obvious reasons.
Right. Right. And talk about some of the programming headaches or obstacles in, let's say, building an ecosystem, and then you're creating a blockchain oracle on top of that, to facilitate and move all these different pieces around.
Yeah, it's the programming part's definitely interesting. It's a lot of these programming languages people are working with are much less than a decade old. Right. And so you're working with traditional code, you're working with smart contract code. And so a lot of people sometimes you'll find are learning on the fly. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. People with the knowledge of how applications are structured can learn on the fly, as long as they're good at what they've done. They've architected applications before, and it's definitely a new way of thinking about it. You're much more limited in what you can do. So traditional programming, you can do almost anything, but in blockchain programming, it's only like 10 or 15 actions you can do. So imagine you trying to build like a Lego toy castle, and instead of having hundreds of different pieces, you only have 16 to build what those amazing structures you see like at Legoland. Um,
Right.
so you really have to get creative with how to structure it. Um, yeah.
Right. And I guess maybe like a blockchain castle, like a blockchain Lego castle. If you attached, let's say, the wrong Lego or the wrong door, probably can't change it. You kind of almost build on top or around it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's very hard to change once it goes live, because it's public, and it's you say, hey, there's a bug here. You can't tell anybody until you fix it and hope that no one exploits it. Whereas in traditional Web 2, you take it down overnight, fix it, and put it back up. In Web 3, it's out there, and anybody can exploit it. And even if you do find a fix, it takes weeks sometimes to put a fix in.
Wow. Yeah, and that definitely makes a lot of sense. And I was going to ask too, especially for somebody who's very experienced as a programmer and developing like applications. How many times do you have to do, or how many tests, or what's the process of testing, before, launching, let's say, the product on like the mainnet? So like, if a blockchain, programmer, developer, if you will, is creating, they're putting in the code and whatnot, how many times are they testing that before they really go to launch and, release it to the world?
Yeah, ideally, you've done more testing than programming. You've done more testing than anything in the organization. And for a Web3 organization, it's not really heard of launching without having external auditors. And
Right.
sometimes you see projects with two or three auditors. Consider auditors are expensive, tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And Web3 auditors can charge these amounts because, unlike a Web2 application, your code may be public, your code might be open source. Anybody can look in and see what your code is doing. So you need third parties, you need auditors to verify, hey, this actually does what it says it does. There's no vulnerabilities. We put
Right.
our stamp and approval, and it still doesn't guarantee anything. There's still
Yeah.
bugs found after auditing, but your applications are significantly less trusted if they don't go through these expensive audit processes. So just even doing your own testing is not good enough. You got to go through audits in this space.
Right. And that makes and that makes perfect sense as well. So I guess in theory, and I don't know if it's ever been maybe conceptualized like this, but if somebody is, let's say, a terrible programmer, people can find that out much easier than, let's say, years before.
Yeah, exactly. And people will see it. People will see it, and it will get attacked. If there's money to be made,
Right.
there are some of the brightest, smartest, most talented hackers in the blockchain. Some of the stuff they do on Ethereum and mempool and sniffing transactions and even
Right.
profiting off of other people's transactions. Um, it's an incredibly talented. So if there's $10 to be made, chances are you will be exploited.
Wow. Yeah, and that definitely makes a lot of sense. We're certainly living in new and exciting times. But just to change subject a little bit, let's talk about hackathons. Hackathons are a very good opportunity for ambitious, passionate teams to showcase their projects in front of large audiences and perhaps also win money prizes. So can you talk about your experience, winning a hackathon and then going ahead and launching, Goracle? I think a lot of times when people win hackathons, it's a very special, significant accomplishment, and you're never going up against people who are mediocre. I have experience at these hackathons and met participants and have also competed on behalf of another startup as well. These are very strong, competent, talented people. So to win one of those, I have nothing but the utmost respect for players who do so. So talk about that.
Yeah, yeah. The Encode Club, shout out to Encode. They got these great hackathons, 8 weeks long, which really allows teams to focus and build something useful.
Yeah.
A lot of hackathons are 2 to 3 day events, where you really put something together, and it's more about getting your vision across the finish line. Whereas in Code, they had the 8 week hackathon, and it's about building something that works.
Right.
And we were able to really focus on what we were trying to build, make it work, make it look good. Hackathons are probably one of the best tools, not just to learn, but to also network and connect with like-minded developers building in your space. And a lot of times you find the developers that you meet there, you become friends for life and go on to work on different projects. So really, it's much more than building something.
Yeah.
It's about that connection and building that network up. I'm building something that lasts. And then the pressure, definitely there were nights I didn't sleep. There were nights you start to question what you're doing. It's a lot. Even 8 weeks long is a short time to build an application, and so highly recommend hackathons as a way to get exposure as well, because interestingly, there's a lot of eyeballs watching these hackathons. They're very well watched. A lot of them happen at conferences, and they're judged. I know that
Right.
each one happens so many different places. Algorand has many different hackathons throughout the world, and there's just a lot of eyeballs on these top tier projects that are coming out of there. So highly recommend it.
Right. Right. And speaking of Algorand, when you launched Goracle, you launched that using the Algorand blockchain. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
So, how did you and the team come to, let's say, using and sticking with Algorand? There's so many out there. Many projects are built on Ethereum, and now more and more so on things like Solana or Near or Matic, or Polkadot. What makes Algorand very particular and special?
Yeah, we looked at quite a large number of blockchains when we were building the sports application I mentioned. And
Yeah.
if you know about sports data, the amount of data generated from a single event is a lot.
Right.
Excuse
Immense.
me. Yeah, and so now you have many different sports. Each sport has many different leagues. Each league has hundreds of matches. So we're talking, yeah, megabytes per match. We're talking gigabytes of data. So we really needed a blockchain that can handle high throughput of data. We needed a
Okay.
blockchain that was quick. Blocks were being minted every few seconds, and we needed to have no downtime. We needed it to be excellent, but we also needed kind of mainstream support, if I might say. So having a USDC, for example, a stable coin that's well trusted like Circle, was also
Yeah.
extremely important. And so Algorand was pretty much the only one that checked off all those boxes for us.
Right.
And so we decided to fully focus and go all in on Algorand.
Got it. And you know, obviously the speed, throughput, the rate in which you can facilitate a transaction, how fast, how efficiently is very, very important. So how would you compare Algorand to, let's say, Ethereum when it comes to the amount of power that's used?
Yeah. So, the way I put it, it's Ethereum versus everything else, right? Um,
Good way of putting it.
some
Yeah.
people say it's one versus another. They try to compare two layer twos, but ultimately, Ethereum is the first mover, and everybody's using Ethereum. And the other chains are really trying to get as much market share from Ethereum.
Right.
Ethereum actually, they're moving to proof of stake now, so they're gonna reduce their power output by 99.5% if all that goes well. So great job. Highly commend the team. Vitalik, the prince. If Satoshi's the king, Vitalik is the prince of blockchain. And so, yeah, these improvements are going to really reduce the power. It's not going to help with the gas fees. It's still quite expensive, still
Right.
congested, but it's a step in the right direction environmentally. Algorand definitely has practically no fees for each transaction, very little, tenth of a penny.
Right.
Extreme, much quicker. I think less than 4 seconds is generally clocked at lately. And yeah, so it's I think but they both have their advantages. But overall, I think um, Algorand's kind of got a lot going for it. No downtime, highly
Right.
scalable. But I'm really happy with Ethereum's move to proof of stake to reduce its environmental impact.
Right. And that is, that's very important. And it is a, primary concern, I guess you could say, really among the, I guess you could say, the overall view of the technology in the space, but also, companies are also, over time have become a lot more conscious of, effects on the environment. So it's very promising to hear that that Algorand really presents a lot of potential to making high caliber applications to do some of these things as as well. And for aspiring programmers out there, I often get this question from the viewership. It's like, oh, I really enjoy this space, I really want to develop applications. Where do I start? So if you can talk about your background, the programming languages, your education in this subject matter, I think I think a decent amount of the viewership will also find that helpful as well. Because one of the questions is, I like this stuff. Where do I start?
Yeah. There's a couple ways to start. I mean, I studied programming in computer science in school, but even after, there was so much more learning. And there are people who studied computer science decades ago, right? They're going to have to
Right.
continuously learn. And when I was going to school, this is early 2010s, there was no blockchain courses at that time, right?
Right.
So
Right.
so having a good understanding. Mostly, we were doing a lot of Java, and things like that. So having a good understanding with just system architecture, I think, helps. I think a lot of people jump straight into programming, but I would always highly recommend learning more about the fundamentals. And the fundamentals are, you know, what makes a computer work in the first place, right? The zeros and
Right.
the ones of the things.
Right.
The lower, once you really get the lower level, how memory works, what are transistors and things like that. It builds this fundamental understanding of computers and Turing machines, what those are, and from there, it's not it's you can kind of start to teach yourself a lot if you're not going to school. And I like to use Elon Musk as an example, who taught himself how to build spaceships from books. It sounds crazy, but really, I think books are a huge resource, and just
Yeah.
really understanding them. And it might take 10 books to get the point across, but I definitely think there's no competition um, as a learning resource when it comes compared to books.
Sure. So I guess you could say when building a DApp, and I think it not in all cases, but in most cases. So you have to have some sort of programming, excuse me, programming dedicated to the actual creation of smart contracts or kind of like processes. And then you have like the overall,
Yeah.
I guess, architecture of that. So if I was to, let's say, give advice, based on our conversation, if somebody says like, hey Adam, I've watched your episodes, where do I start? Would like, suggesting like Solidity for one be like a good start for smart contracts, and maybe programming languages. What about, C plus plus, or what about Python or Golang or any of those?
Yeah. Python may be one of the easier ones to wrap your head around. I think C++, managing your own memory, people are slowly moving away from using that, even though it's
Right.
it's really kind of uh, fundamental when you look at the history of computer science. But Golang is a great one. It's a bit higher up on the learning scale, but if you can learn that, it's kind of a next generation programming language, I would call it. Um,
Right.
and so, yeah, I think starting easy, just with something like Python, to understand the fundamentals, because once you learn one programming language really well, a lot of them just become easy, because it's a difference between syntax most of the time. I
Right.
mean, different programming languages do things differently. Like, some handle memory for you, whereas others, you have to handle every little thing. And so Python, I think, is a nice, easy language to start with, and then you can move up to something like a Golang or C++. And then a Solidity is once you kind of understand the other programming languages, I think Solidity becomes much easier. But a lot of times, Solidity is going to be one part of your application. You might have a front end which also uses like JavaScript. JavaScript is probably, I should have mentioned it sooner, but the number one programming language in the world. It's a bit messy, but it gets the job done. It's such a versatile tool, but it's easy to go wrong. I love it, so I'd recommend it for sure. But yeah, you'll find you're using a lot of different programming languages in a single project.
Right.
So just getting good at one will allow you to, okay, build on top of that. And then I would say something like a Solidity or a Golang is maybe a tier two on the level of difficulty. maybe a JavaScript or a Python is it's easier for most people to start with.
And by the way, that's a great way of conceptualizing it, and I'm glad you kind of put a tier to it. People often, like to know, okay, so where is the easiest starting point, among all of this giant, let's say, tree, this giant, collection of programming languages, and overwhelmingly, and I'll even have to say it as I do have some experience with Python. It is very, you could almost say, user friendly if you're coming from an experience that's not programming. If you're really just learning it for the first time, it does kind of, at least with Python anyway, it does feel easier at first glance versus some others.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very straightforward, the way you write code, it's very
Right.
structured. It's very structured. You can't just by writing something wrong, it tells you, hey, something's wrong.
Yes,
Um,
that's right.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. JavaScript, it's a forgiving language, so you can do something wrong and it won't complain. But you may have introduced a bug. Other languages are a lot more structured and much harder, where you have to manage memory. Once you talk about managing memory, that's like when you start to move up to the next tiers, because you actually have to like understand the fundamentals of the computers, um, to be able to manage memory.
Right. And moving from that, if we could talk a little bit about the Blockchain Oracle Summit, because I thought that was an incredibly informative event. And it's not just one of those kind of events where, people are purely more kind of driven either by passing out business cards or collecting merch or distributing merch. This was a very, very large collection of subject matter experts, developers, and entrepreneurs really explaining and unpacking, some complex subjects in a very, very kind of engaging, presentation type of manner. So, can you talk about how your team ended up coming to Berlin, and perhaps touch a little bit on your presentation from there too?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. Um, you know, all the speakers and everybody who was there were really there to learn and to share best
Yeah.
practices and their insights. And it was a really refreshing, compared to some. You go to another conference and you think it's going to be great, and you realize a lot of people have paid to speak type thing.
Right.
And so it was extremely knowledgeable. Like every speaker was a must see.
Yeah.
And the contacts we made there, there's something called an alliance of decentralized oracles that came out of it, where you have these oracles are working closely together to create standards, for oracles, to help make it easier for people to adopt, to make sure people can use different oracles easily. And so yeah, it was extremely informative and highly scientific, but also very great for learning for somebody who's not too familiar with oracles but needs to use them. And so yeah, and we were talking about trust. I think that was the main thing, is trust, and recreating trust uh, through oracles. And I think I mentioned this earlier on the show, but how do you simulate a trustless environment when you introduce an oracle, a single point, where it's managed by a single person?
Right. And,
Yeah,
and
yeah. So
and that's that was a lot to unpack and explain. And what was the main point that you wanted people to kind of walk away with from your piece during that event?
yeah. So again, trustless is a misnomer. It's distributed trust is the better word, right? And to
Right.
build really secure oracles, fail-proof oracles, we need to distribute the trust. We need to make sure that the data sources are diversified as much as possible.
Right. And as far as like diversifying data sources, and by the way, that's a good topic to touch on. I think one of the practical reality is excuse me, would be not every project is meant for or should be on a blockchain. Maybe some projects would be better off on a cloud or some other alternative.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of types of applications that simply don't really make sense on the blockchain. And I'm trying to come up with something, but something maybe mission critically, right? Your medicinal equipment, right? You're trying to do an operation room. You can't really be using applications on blockchain to be saving someone's life or keep someone's personal information uh,
Sure.
public, right? There are definitely ways you can encrypt certain things on the blockchain, but I think there's definitely a lot of mission critical applications that don't need to be there. But at the same time, you can also make the argument for that you can design blockchains in a certain way or private blockchains that may overcome some of those. So it's really, I think, case by case or use case basis.
Right. And to kind of expand upon some of the more technical aspects of this, could you give an example or examples rather? What type of projects are good to put on a blockchain? And let's say what kind of projects would be better suited for, let's say, a cloud?
Yeah, okay, sure. So I think anything, so one I think really should be on the blockchain maybe is ticketing, right? In this world, you have all these when you're trying to buy a ticket for an event, it's you can represent that as an NFT,
Right.
really, right? Um, and then when you sell it, you can you can sell it and have a resale market. That's not necessarily kind of because right now there's a lot of scams and a lot of people buying fake tickets or there's also these ticketing agencies that have insanely high markups and so having something like this to be decentralized, having an event organizer can make the most money from these tickets because when they sell them, sometimes these tickets get resold for many times
Sure.
their value. If you own an event and you can say, hey, if you sell this ticket, if you end up reselling it, I'll make a percentage of that, right? That will really reduce ticket scalping, and I think that's one area where we're very excited to see uh, things moving in.
Got it. And
Yeah,
to the
yeah.
and to the second
So
part, yes, please.
yeah. So ideas of something that may not necessarily make sense on a blockchain. I think there's a lot of mission critical like infrastructure. There's these grids, the town grids, for example, that kind of control our infrastructure, like electricity and things like
Sure.
that. um, there's a lot of like type of medicinal personal information that you don't want on a blockchain, like my health history. I wouldn't necessarily want that on a blockchain. You could encrypt it, but I think there's a lot of sensitivity around personal
Sure.
data that you might want to have kept secret. Um, there's ways to get around that by encrypting and things like that. But I think anything that's kind of mission critical and needs significant uptime or um, very fast access speeds, you might want to think twice about.
Right. And
Yeah,
when it comes to privacy, do you think that certain private blockchains can maybe get around some of those privacy issues? Like, let's say if there's like a designated designated validators or designated permissions and so to say, does that get around the privacy issues, or are those privacy issues still going to be a problem even in those cases?
yeah. I think it's less up to validators and permission individuals, and maybe more about the level of encryption
Yeah.
and the level of knowledge of the common person, right?
Right.
Because if you have people who are highly knowledgeable about these kinds of things and can keep something like a secret key safe, it might be easier than you can encrypt your data, or you can share these secret keys with, or sorry, share public keys with the right people and then unlock it as necessary. But I think right now, because the knowledge around how to use public and private keys and if even if things were properly encrypted, having average people being able to use these systems, because at the end of the day, the weakest link is generally going to be um,
Right.
near you, right? And so if all money today was on the blockchain, how many people lose their wallet, right?
Sure.
You lose your wallet with your private key, or someone steals it, it's no longer yours, and you'll never get access to it again,
Right.
right? And so I think once the knowledge catches up, and people are or there are systems to mimic Web 2 and the real world, or how things are currently done, and fail safes for certain people. I think that's when we'll start to see larger adoption. But I think right now, people are still building, people are still trying new things and ways around it, where something as simple as maybe you losing your keys won't result in you losing your entire history of health records.
Got it. And moving on to a related issue, so NFTs and non-fungible tokens. Do NFTs have a lot to offer when it comes to programming and perhaps creating genuine solutions? And I think much of the audience is well informed. NFTs are not just for making NFT art. There's also other practical, you could say, utility like you could say transaction like functions, so to say. So as a programmer, what do you see as the longevity or the future of NFTs?
Yeah, I think NFTs are going to be a huge part of our future. When you can start representing, physical things in the real world on NFTs, a great example I'll give is property. There are parts of the world these
Sure.
days where property, the deed or the deed is non-existent, right? You might have a title to a property,
Right.
but no one believes it. It's easily forged,
Sure.
and many times you actually have to rely on eyewitnesses in the community to establish ownership.
Yeah, and that could be a whole crazy trial, and it's expensive. It's time consuming. You may not
Yeah,
even win.
yeah, when and
Right.
people's memory are
Right.
fickle, right?
Right. Exactly.
And so having an NFT which cannot be manipulated, and if you own it, you own it. Period. It simply cannot be forged. I think that's going to be huge. And think of any kind of anything that can be represented as such.
Right.
Right. The keys to something, and we were talking earlier about health records and giving somebody access to something
Sure.
that you own, which can be represented in an NFT. And so I have very high hopes for NFT. I think it will be huge in the future to represent ownership in many different ways.
Got it. And when it comes to the metaverse, that seems to be on the horizon. We're going to kind of going to be entering almost like a cyberpunk future where the way we operate and interact in life is going to be largely digital. The way we buy groceries, the way we go to the bank, it's going to be, let's say, you and I with some sort of AR, VR, mixed reality representation, kind of in a parallel world, but not really, doing what we usually do in like everyday life. When do you think like society is going to be all wired in or hooked in?
Yeah, yeah, I can't wait. I've never sat courtside on a real NBA game. I've always been in the bleachers stands, but I would love to be able to watch the game and be really immersed
Yeah.
and sit courtside, right? There's just a lot of experiences that we people don't have right now, and also think about it. People want to watch Champions League, but they don't live in Europe, right?
Right.
There's a lot of experiences people would love to have, traveling, but they can't go for any reason that you can simulate in VR. Um, and it comes close to the real thing. You can never replace the real thing, but it can come close. And so I think it's going to be a very interesting um, space. And even this conversation that we're having, it would be cooler if you were sitting right here, wouldn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah, and vice versa. That'd be pretty insane. Pretty cool.
Yeah,
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 absolutely.
yeah, absolutely. So I'm really excited about it, and I think eventually, obviously, there's some downsides. There are ways where people can become a little bit too immersed in the virtual world
Sure.
compared to the real world. And I definitely think we have to make sure we balance the good with the bad. I mean, the internet was changed the world, right?
Right.
But of course, there's been a lot of negative from it, but the positives significantly outweighed the negative. So,
Absolutely.
but,
Yeah, and on a final note, what does Goracle have in store as far as conferences, summits, projects, launches, and anything related to that? What's on the horizon?
yeah, we've been working with a lot of our partners using our app, developing it, testing it, iterating on it. And the way it works within this world is generally launch first on a test net. And then people use it and make sure it works great, and then they're comfortable with how it goes, and we iterate before you move to mainnet. So we're hoping to move to mainnet in a month or two, and then we're going to probably be running hackathons by the end of the year where people can use Goracle to
Nice.
build cool applications, kind of coming full circle, right?
Yeah.
And so we're excited about that. We're excited to attend a couple of Algorand events. The big one is Decipher in Algorand. I believe that's in Dubai. Always love being at Bitcoin Miami. It's going to be sometime
Sure.
next year. But yeah, we're always looking for events close by as well. So um, yeah, it's going to be a fun few months coming up.
Good stuff, and I'm looking forward to hearing all the updates about it. As time goes on. So, listen, Abdul, I have to say it was an absolute pleasure having you coming on to the show today
Yeah,
and really unpacking and explaining a lot of these different aspects to programming because as great and as promising blockchain is. Understanding some of these nuances and minutia are very helpful in A, kind of clarifying what you're ultimately interested in, but also B, what's coming up in the future? What is our future going to look like? What are, let's say, even live stream episodes like this going to look like in the next 5 to 10 years? And like you mentioned before, if we're already hooked and the world is fully immersed in a metaverse, you and I could essentially it could almost be like me hanging out with you over there drinking my coffee and we're just talking back and forth, so
yeah,
to say.
yeah, it's
So
crazy.
yeah, there's a lot of interesting things coming up the pike, and better interest and understanding in this space is, I think, very, very important to kind of see the writing on the wall. So, again, Abdul, thank you very much for coming on. Again, it was great meeting you in Berlin, a few months ago as well, and learning about your project. And I thoroughly enjoyed your
Yeah,
presentation, there as well. So, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing and celebrating your future successes,
thanks,
over the next
Adam.
few months.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, again, I love the type of diversity of people that you bring on here, and definitely
Thank you.
excited to continue to listen. And yeah, good luck with everything you're working on, and looking forward to seeing you at another conference or event soon.
Absolutely, good sir.
Yeah, yeah. All right, my friend.
All right. Thank you again and take care.
Thanks
And
again.
talk to you soon.
Yeah, bye bye.